rare incunabulum or manuscript in the library of the General Seminary in New York, where I teach, indicating how both Bede and Eusebius were often bound together in one volume, which shows their close relationship to each other, so that there would be a volume that would have Eusebius for the earliest history generally of the church, and then Bede for the earliest history of the church in England. And often they're in the same volume, in the earliest printings of it, printed that way. Bede, from the outset of his work, says that he has three major purposes in writing. The first is historical, properly so-called, in which he attempts to give a comprehensive chronological treatment, one that is fair to the original sources, and faithful details, such as the succession of English bishops from earliest times, beginning with St. Augustine of Canterbury. His second purpose is ethical, offering some value judgments as a Christian, whereby he commends what he thinks is good and condemns what he thinks is bad. And of course, whenever you start doing that, you run into value judgments, and not everyone will agree, and he acknowledges that. The third purpose, theological, is related to church unity, as he traces the movement in England from ecclesiastical, that is church diversity, to ecclesiastical unity, focusing on the Synod of Whitby, that is every council or meeting at a place called Whitby, located on the northeast Yorkshire coast of Northumbria in England, in the year 664, whereby the king, Oswiu, made a decision for the English people that they should stop arguing about the correct date of Easter, and henceforth the focus of their church life, their calendar, and their worship would be according to the Roman dating rather than the Celtic dating. I'm sure you're aware of these kind of discussions here in your own country today, with the different viewpoints and different parties and so forth. One is Kosovo and so forth. But at that time, back in this period in England, they had the privilege of having a ruler who just said, all right, enough of this arguing, now I'm going to make the decision for all of you. And of course, you can't do that here. You have to go fight about it and so forth. We in America had to do the same thing with the American Revolution. The British wanted this, the American colonists wanted something else. But back then, when you had a king that ruled, you could do that kind of thing. So the king at that time decided, Oswiu decided for the Roman side of things rather than the Celtic side. Bede makes the following observation about the situation at Whitby, which he places at the very center of his narrative history, in which I paraphrase. It had been happening that sometimes the English church would be celebrating Easter twice in the same year, so that on the same day the king is keeping Celtic Easter, while the queen is still in Lent, observing Palm Sunday. There's confusion. This is intolerable, Bede implies, that Christian disputes can even split the followers of Jesus to open disagreement about the Easter Feast of Feasts, that annual moment in liturgical time when heaven touches earth and chronology intersect with history. Fortunately, says Bede, God sent the greatest Archbishop of Canterbury, of the early church, early English church, Theodore of Tarsus, who was actually a Greek, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury at this time, dispatched to the Pope, by the Pope, to England from Rome in the year 668, to organize the church in England, teaching the Christian faith, correcting abuses, consecrating good bishops. They had a lot of bad bishops, and Theodore of Tarsus said, out with them, appoint ones who are much more straightforward and honest, and generally promoting stability and unity. Theodore of Tarsus was the first of the archbishops whom the whole English church consented to obey, says Bede. And never had there been such happy times, such spiritual progress, since the English first came to Britain. Theodore was the Archbishop of Canterbury during most of Bede's life. So far, so good, we may say. But Bede is very partial to one side, to the Roman side, who were obviously the winners at the Synod of Whitby, because the king ruled in their favor. And after that, the Celtic expressions of Christianity were pressed more and more out into the margins, away from the center. Today, in our own time, there is a considerable longing, especially among Anglicans, for those ancient Celtic Christian ways, and books are being written about them with such titles as Christianity We Lost, or The Celtic Alternative. What was at stake at Whitby in 664? Coleman, Bishop and Abbot of Lindisfarne, represented the Celtic traditions in the debates there, traditions that had come from the north of Britain by way of Iona and Ireland. And that was the Celtic tradition. These Celtic ways had and have a great appeal to many of us as Anglicans and to modern people generally. A great appeal to them if you're going to at all get into religion, for they emphasize the ancient ways, individual choice, decentralized authority. The Celtic churches were rather loosely organized around tribes, and sometimes their abbots seem to have been more important than their bishops. And the Celtic bishops, like Aidan, Chad, Cuthbert, would usually travel only on foot. Bede himself, Romanist though he was, admired their humility and their simplicity and their poverty. Alas, however, he laments, the Celtic Christians refused to agree on the date of the Lord's resurrection, the need for a common liturgy, a common Easter, or when to celebrate such other feasts as Ascension and Pentecost. They place little value on law and order, says Bede, and they show this by their styles of tonsure that are different from the circle on the crown of the head that characterizes the followers of Rome. So the Roman followers would, it's a bit kind of like the way my hair is getting. They have hair all around their heads like this. And if you wore your hair that way, you were on the Roman side of things. On the other hand, if you were Celtic, you would shave all the front part of your head, just like about here and across. It goes a line that goes from one ear to the other. You'd be bald all in the front, but then long shocks of hair in the back. Now, the challenge for any of you who are stimulated by my lecture this morning is what I've just described is the way the Celtic and Roman male people in early England wore their hair, either Celtic or Roman. But the question is, how did women wear their hair? And now, of course, it is true back then, as for so much of early church history, women were generally, and I'm sorry to say this, placed in a rather second place compared to men. And of course, the men at that time, some, at least a lot of them, were glad that's where they belonged. But there were other groups of women religious who were already beginning to kind of stretch their arms and say, no, we are full human beings too. So that these two different understandings then of men and women. We of course have this very much in America today, and I didn't know that much about Kosovo to know about women's rights in Kosovo, but certainly in my country, women are more and more coming into their own. We've seen that with Hillary Clinton here in the USA. In fact, of course, America always is supportive of good innovations. So we were so happy in America. We had two different candidates for president. Both kinds had never before been a candidate for president. We had a black person, a man, who won, and we had a woman who almost won. And So there were these kind of things, but these were differences. So this is the kind of Celtic tradition was much more individualistic, decentralized. The Celtic churches were rather loosely organized around tribes. And let me underline what I just said. If any of you in your own researches can find out how Celtic women arrange their hairdos, I will offer, and I will send it either by email or by Chris or somebody. I offer a prize to anyone. It can be to a woman or a man who can let me know how the Celtic women wore their hair, because Bede doesn't say anything about it at all. But it's an important question. All right. So Bede admires all of the Celtic peoples for their humility, their simplicity, and their poverty. But he laments that they cannot pull their act together. They cannot worship on the same liturgical calendar. They can't have a common day of Easter. Of course, little did he know, Christians in the 21st century still don't agree on the day of Easter. So it's gone on a long time, but he didn't know that. So these are the two kinds of poles that existed in the early British Christianity. By contrast, the Roman side had come to England not from the north up here, where the Celtics came from, in the north of Britain, by Ireland and by Iona, but it came from the southeast by way of St. Augustine of Canterbury, who had been sent by the Pope in the years 596-97. And it was Augustine himself, Augustine of Canterbury, as we know him, who was responsible for the baptism of Ethelbert, King of Kent, about that time. So Augustine came from a different kind of approach to Christianity, an approach that much more admired law and order, which the Celts didn't particularly. So this is a major difference between the two. And, the church and the very baptismal font where he probably baptized Ethelbert can still be seen. And in a moment we shall see this actually in the pictorial presentation. Ethelbert was the first Christian king in England. He was the first English ruler to use the phrase Dei Gratia, the grace of God, in his title, to show that his rule depended upon God's grace. I don't know about Kosovo, and I suspect you have much more democratically elected leaders here, but for example in England, still the Queen or King of England will always have their title, Elizabeth by the grace of God, Queen of England, or something of the sort. That's a standard title that English rulers still follow. We have a joke about that in America, and sometimes we refer to someone like maybe George Bush, or someone as one of our rulers, the president, and these are the people that don't agree with his policies, so we refer to him George by the inadvertence of God. And then God made a mistake that time, or something to the sort. But generally speaking, by the grace of God, God actually brought that to England in the case of King Ethelbert. First Christian king in England, first